Dr. Carrie Hepburn here from Compass PD, and I am super excited for our guest today on the podcast. Many of you know that one of my dearest friends is Dr. Stephanie Brenner, and that we do a lot together. So you see us a lot together. And she is here joining us on the podcast. And if you don't know who Dr. Stephanie Brenner is, I just want to give you just a little bit of information about her. And one being that Stephanie.
Carrie makes you sound really good if you didn't know this already.
She has been in education for 18 years, starting out as a first grade teacher in an urban school district, and then moved to a suburban school district as a literacy coach and has been there for several years. Dr. Brenner is an educational consultant. She specializes in literacy instruction, especially focusing on students who have the characteristics of dyslexia. It's something that's very near and dear to her heart. So she's amazing at that. And then Dr. Brenner and I have been working for about a year-ish on a book titled The Roadmap to Comprehensive Literacy. It is a labor of love, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today. But we're both co-authoring a book right now called The Roadmap to Comprehensive Literacy. And that book will be, the target audience for that book is literacy leaders, instructional leaders, the people who are leading the literacy work in their schools, particularly in elementary. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm super excited to officially be involved in one of these.
I know, it's about time. And I was thinking, like, one of the things that we talk about, that Stephanie and I talk about, is we really nerd out, and we are going to try not to nerd out and keep it within 30 minutes, because literally we could talk about this topic for hours, and I'm not so sure that that would be what all of you have time to do. So I could envision this being some sort of series. Right. It could be a series. So as we're talking, as always, I have my professional notebook with me and my flare pens, because I'm always taking notes and doing that. And you see the same, Dr. Brenner has hers with her too. So we kind of nerd out together. So we're going to get started. Dr. Brenner, I was wondering if we could talk about what is comprehensive literacy? Like, what do we mean when we say that?
So I think that when, like, what you and I talk about with comprehensive literacy is it being more of a framework for teaching, and that framework includes components that then include an instructional methods, and those methods are very intention-driven instruction. So within comprehensive literacy, that within that framework of instruction, the components are things that we typically talk about a lot in classrooms, things like the mini lesson and small group time and independent working time, conferences, shared reading, shared writing, interactive read aloud, interactive grammar editing, phonics and word study.
Yeah.
So
I also think, like, interactive vocabulary, we don't talk about that interactive vocabulary and intentionally planning for that interactive vocabulary too. So that's something else that I would think would be another component.
Right. Yeah. So it's just the components that we teach throughout the day. But within those components lie very intentional instructional methods.
Mm-hmm. So as we think about, like, those instructional methods, and you're saying, like, intentional instructional methods, what are some things that kind of stick out to you? What do you mean by that?
So I think that being very So intentional to me be in here is like where you might hear like what people will say structured literacy. The intentional methods you would use are the things that you, meaning that you are systematically and explicitly including instruction in phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, phonics and word study, vocabulary and comprehension. Like you are always intentionally and in a progression. So that's where that systematic comes into play, including instruction in all of those areas, in all parts of those components. So in your mini lesson, you are intentional and explicit to provide instruction in phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, phonics and word study, vocabulary, comprehension. And then in your small groups, you're doing the same thing. You're intentionally giving explicit systematic instruction and phonemic awareness or phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, phonics, word study, vocabulary, comprehension. Within that, though, too, you're not just like a one and done. It's repeated instruction so that we're working towards this goal of automaticity and fluency. So kids have skills that are so automatic in reading and writing that they're able to be proficient, skilled readers, writers, and spellers. So that's kind of what the intentional part of the of comprehensive literacy entails.
Mm, mhm, mhm. I'm trying to, I was, as you were talking, one of the things you were talking about intentional and systematic and explicit. And sometimes I think we don't realize how when we talk about all of those components, like maybe we teach our phonics lesson and we can add additional practice of that phonics lesson in our shared reading.
Right. Yeah.
Or we might in writer's workshop have an interactive writing lesson with a small group of students practicing that phonics as well. But we have to intentionally plan that.
Yeah. Yes. And we can't just assume that kids are going to go do that on their own. We have to intentionally set up the environment so that kids have that repeated practice of those skills. So that's where we're building towards fluency and automaticity, so that some of the whatever we practice during word study and phonics, if I'm asking you to then practice that during small group reading, even like I might have some decodable texts or even flashcards of high frequency words that kids would use and practice during their independent time. I've intentionally put those things there for them to give them the extra touches that they need. So when it's time to read connected text, whatever they want to read, and when it's time for them to write, their brain's not doing so much work. And they can just do it with automaticity and enjoyment. But it takes that intentional planning of setting up the environment that kids are involved in so that they have those exposures. It can't be an assumption or they're gonna get it. They have to have that explicit instruction and explicit practice and repetition of the skills that we're teaching throughout all parts of their day.
I think it can't be an assumption. We can't leave anything to chance.
Right.
That's where I think that explicit, intentional really sticks out to me. I also think that we have to also differentiate that independent practice for our students. Every student in the class doesn't necessarily have the same decodables or types of text for their component, like the independent reading time in
Right.
book baggies or in their book bins. So
Or stacks of books that are on their desk, and you in intermediate classroom will see stacks of books
yeah.
up. Yeah, that is absolutely true. What one kid needs extra practice and repetition and is not the same as another kid. So part of that intentional planning is making sure kids have access to the right things that they need.
Mm,
Um, that's the role of the teacher to make sure in your stack, in your baggie, in your box, or whatever, you have the right materials.
mhm,
And so some kids could be practicing a decodable. All kids might have some kind of decodable text that they're reading, but the decodable text could be focused on a different skill.
mhm,
Um, all kids could be practicing high frequency words, but the words that they have on their ring or in their baggie or on their sheet to practice for fluency could be different.
right.
Um, all kids could be, intermediate, could be practicing fluency with prefixes and suffixes and roots and bases. But what one kid is practicing is different than what another kid is practicing.
Yeah.
So the idea of we're all practicing these things, just the actual skill or content of what we're practicing is different
Mm,
to meet all kids where they are. And one of the things as we were kind of getting prepared for this is we often think about just our low kids,
mhm,
but it just not just our low kids, our kids who are higher too deserves that responsive teaching and that differentiated teaching too during those times. They deserve access to things that are at their level.
yeah.
And that takes as much intentional planning for as it does for our low kids.
It really does. And being at one point in my career, I so I was a gifted teacher as well. And I remember when we were starting MTSS, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, and sitting in the leadership team meetings when I was still in the classroom and being talked when we were starting like PLCs and MTSS, we were getting this model going. Um, being told we needed to provide interventions, but just for our struggling students. And one of my comments at that time, and at that time I did have students at all ranges and all levels, but was if you looked at my students that were average and above average readers when they walked into the classroom, they weren't making progress because we were spending so much time on our students that would be considered struggling readers, that I wasn't dedicating the time that was needed for the other students, and that wasn't fair to them either. Um,
Right. And had the same experience. And it's easy for teachers to know, like, okay, these kiddos are coming in
mhm,
already at the grade level I need them to be. So I'm just not
yeah,
gonna, they're fine. They're gonna be okay.
mhm,
Instead of realizing they deserve the
mhm,
opportunity to grow
mhm,
also a year's worth in during this time or as much as possible for them. And they deserve that explicit responsive teaching as well. So what I love about comprehensive literacy is it allows for those opportunities to be um, had in the classroom. It just takes intentional planning and instruction on the teacher's part.
yeah, yeah. It's not teaching is not easy. It's definitely not for the faint of heart at all. What can we do to help set organizations up for success in
Mhm.
order to implement the comprehensive literacy model? What are some things that you think about?
The thing that comes to my mind, the very first thing is the teacher knowledge.
Mhm,
Um, because the more teachers have a really solid understanding of how our language works. So like, what are the foundations of our language system? And that involves phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, word study. The more they know about that,
Mhm.
in addition to how one becomes a reader, how
Mhm.
one becomes a writer, and the continuum, the processes, the steps that are predictable that kids go through. Though when you have that group of knowledge, um, that sets teachers up for being able to be responsive to their kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can use those things to meet kids where they are.
Mm.
And during those parts of the day that you're able to be most responsive, and also just your whole group instruction. So not just small group time.
Mhm.
When you know those things, so increasing teacher knowledge in those areas is, I feel like, the best thing that any organization can do for their teachers.
Mhm.
Um, there's a huge push for data, and sometimes we have so much data we don't even know what to do with it. It's like paralyzing to a lot of teachers, and quite frankly a lot of administrators too. Like, they're being told to do all of these things and they do it, but they
Right.
don't know what to do with it.
Yep.
um, they don't know how to analyze it. They don't know how to look at it in a way that makes it useful in the
Mhm.
classroom and in their instruction. So I think that when we increase our teachers' knowledge of the reading processes, the writing processes, the foundations of our sit language, we're able to help them use that data that they get from screenings and diagnostic assessments, and just quite frankly what they see in the classroom every day.
Mhm.
They, they can use that in intentional ways to further plan instruction that is explicit. It is systematic, because they see where their kids are in this process, and they can just go to the next step that is, we know, is the best next step
Yeah.
for kids. And they can feel good about that instruction that they're giving. So, I think that that is absolutely the very best thing we can do for teachers, is just to increase their knowledge in those areas. It's almost like the thing that is the base of all the things we do as a teacher, and in our education system. It's based on how much our teachers know and understand.
Yep. Yep. It reminds me, back in the day, you and I attended, and many of us, our district, former districts, sent us to a training on learning the foundational, gaining foundational knowledge of being a reader and those
Right.
systems and processes. And this was probably 13 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even longer. I don't know.
13.
And
I remembered my first day back from maternity leave
oh,
from Benjamin was being participating in that training for the first
oh,
time.
there you go. So about 13 years ago, we had attended this, and actually Stephanie became a certified trainer for them. And how all of us sitting in the room said, knowing this information transforms us as educators. And our particular district at the time decided to develop a scope and sequence of phonological and phonics skills to teach, and then taught teachers a structure.
Mhm.
And that was all that was needed. And we saw an increase immediately in our reading scores. And that lasted for several years. Like, our reading scores were going up. So we were at that time still doing like balanced literacy and implementing this really strong scope and sequence of phonics,
Right.
in K through 5. And here's a predictable problem that happens. So that's why I'm adding this to our thing right now, is about as we started progressing a few years away from that, here's what happened. New teachers came in, teachers that they in their best intentions and hearts, they created smartboard lessons or Google Slides or PowerPoints, whatever you want to call it. One person would be in charge of creating that, and they would send it out to all their colleagues, and then
Yeah.
somebody would stand up and just present it. The person who does the work is the person who has the knowledge. That's something that we say all the time at Compass PD. So we
Yes.
started losing the fidelity of the
Mhm.
the understanding of that component and how to teach that. And so it didn't take long, within 7, 8, 10 years, we hadn't kept up. That's why it's important to have a professional development cycle. We hadn't made sure that we were refreshing the learning, that new people that were coming in, or as you changed grade levels, you got the learning that was important around this topic
Right.
for that age level that you were supporting. So it's not a one and done
Mhm.
in learning ever. You should have a really intentional design for professional learning for your teachers. So as you teach them really well about a component, don't think that you're done. In a few years, you need to revisit that and keep teaching that as well. And something else I wanted to just chat about as you were talking about setting organizations up for success is something, a trend that we're seeing as Dr. Brenner goes into districts and supports them with their screening. Their screening data is um, due to lack of knowledge, we're looking at a composite score and making decisions based on that single score and not knowing all of the different subtests that
Mhm.
help lead to that score, give you so much more information and how you can be responsive based
Right.
on that. Could you spend just a moment?
So I'm seeing in many places that looking at just one part of the screening data,
Mhm.
and we're making some pretty heavy decisions based on one score that can be misleading instead of looking at the individual testing measures and how kids perform on those testing measures, which can actually be rather diagnostic instead of looking at this overall score. So we might make the assumption that they're doing okay on the overall score, but I'm missing that, for example, a first grader is having a really hard time segmenting words, or a really hard time reading nonsense words.
Mhm.
So that tells me that there's something to be concerned about, because if a first grader is struggling with those two things, we know from research that that is an indication that there's something to be, it's worthy of investigating, that kids need to be solid with those two skills. um, so when, as they're progressing along this reading continuum, they are able um, to decode and do all the things that they need to do. But we're missing that because we're only looking at the overall score.
Yeah.
So it's like this assumption that kids are okay because the overall score is good.
Yep. Yep.
And but what happens is those kids that did not do well on some of those predictable individual testing measures, the data was showing that there was a problem early, but we didn't look at it. So now they get to second, third, fourth grade, and they're the kids not making progress anymore. They're the kids that are all of a sudden we're noticing they are like their screening data shows that there's a problem, and it's because we didn't address the issue early on when the data was there to show us that there's a problem. We just didn't look at the data in that way. And I get it. It can be scary to look at some of that data for a
Yeah.
lot of reasons. And one of them, in a lot of places, when you're having conversations about these kinds of things, it's like, that's way too many kids. If I'm
Right.
looking at my data and I'm worried about all the kids who had their screening data showed there was an area of concern in these places, that's more kids than I can service.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And that is a reality, and something school districts are up, a thing that they're up against, and having to make really crummy decisions, like
Yep.
literally crummy decisions about who do we service, how do we decide which kids we're going to help and provide services to, what's that going to look like, not having the time, the resources, like physical resources, materials, and personnel resources to make that possible.
Mhm.
um, so I get it that looking at that data in that more diagnostic way can be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
um, it's really valuable information to be considering,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. We can't ignore it. It's not going to make the issue go away. It's
Right.
going to compound it for
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
So why, like you and I know both of us talk about comprehensive literacy, but why do we really believe it? Why do we believe in comprehensive literacy?
I think that, uh, why we are so passionate about it is that it is where all of the instructional components that research says are best for students. It's a way for those things to live in the classroom. And so it's not about this way and not about this way. It's not one way or another way. It's
Yeah.
not this or this. It's not program specific. It's teaching and a model that all teachers and students can have access to, um, regardless of situations that are out of their control. And I think also that we believe in it so much because it's how we take really good instruction, um, putting them into action in the classroom so that our students are the ones who benefit.
Right.
And we're able to see them grow as readers and writers and thinkers, so they reach the potential that we have in mind for them.
Yeah. And we don't only want them to reach it, we want them to love reading and writing.
That too. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I know I just want to add just one little thing because I know that we talked about decodable text, but we also believe in kids having choice books and actual literature too. It's
Right,
not just about decodable texts. So
right.
please don't only have decodable text and high frequency words in kids' book baggies. Please.
Exactly. And that's where it's like it's not one way or another way. A comprehensive literacy is the place that both live because, they each have their own very specific purpose
Yeah.
and need in the classroom. So when we create an environment where we understand the need and the purpose for each of them, that they can both live. And so our kids are able to be proficient readers and writers who love
Yeah.
to read and they love to write because we've given them access and tools to help them get there. So that's, I think, why we're both so passionate about it. It's like taking all of it, um, in an intentional way that just makes the best learning environment for kids.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope that everyone goes out sometime when we get this book published and purchase our book It's going to be all about how to make this work in your school. And in the book, it has predictable problems by the month. It has and things that need to be taught and supported to teachers by month, and it has some information about help me. I was thinking predictable problems. We have stuff for instructional leaders, and then the learning for reading and writing in that
Right.
month by month kind of series. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty comprehensive. Thus, the
I
roadmap
mean,
to
who would
not
have thought?
free. And then Dr. Brenner and I are leading this summer of 2022 a comprehensive literacy academy, and we would love for you to join us. And this is really geared toward teachers and coaches that will be supporting, and sometimes it's administrators that are supporting their teachers in their literacy instruction. And
Like
so
how powerful to have your instructional your administrator involved in this learning.
I know. Well, it highlights that that's what you value. You know, we value
Yeah.
this, and we want to support you in this work.
Right.
So we're
Yeah.
doing that in June, and you can check out our website, compass-pd.com, and look under the drop-down menu for what we do or things we do or something, and you'll see Academy and the Phonics Literacy Academy. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for
You
joining me
for
today.
having me and sitting down with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was so, so fun. And we'll do it again because I'm sure people are going to just love hearing from you.
Oh, well, thanks.